Stalin had the warning, he just didn't believe it. The US had the memo, they just didn't act on it. And Israel had the troop movements, they just ignored them. I am Mandatory Fun Day. This is your cold, chaotic, and occasionally sarcastic briefing on why intelligence failures don't happen because people are dumb, but because sometimes they think they're the smartest people in the room.
Yeah, it was between that and Muhammad.
Why the f*** would it be between that or Muhammad? Why don't you just pick a common name like a normal person?
Muhammad is the most commonly used name on earth. Read a f***ing book.
Watch until the end because we're going to break down exactly how 3 of the world's top intelligence powers got it catastrophically wrong. While you are here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get into the video. Why does intelligence fail? Military and national intelligence is supposed to be the sharpest spear in a nation's defense, but time and time again it fails in stunning, sometimes devastating ways. Why, though? A few recurring culprits can be seen. Information silos happen. Agencies hoard intel like a dragon hoarding its gold, like a person on TLC hoarding cat bodies, like fast food restaurants when you want a third sauce. Bureaucratic drag happens. By the time a report gets signed, briefed, and cleared, it's already old news. Intelligence can go stale. It needs to be acted on in a timely manner. Confirmation bias happens. Decision makers may filter intel through their worldview instead of letting the data speak. Overconfidence is a common culprit. The assumption that they wouldn't dare or we would see it coming is often the beginning of the end. Intel professionals will generally rely on historical data, sometimes heavily, to predict future events. It's not a bad practice, but it's not always 100%. Ego and politics are at play. Ultimately, the intel apparatus is people-driven, and people have egos. No one wants to be the person who cried wolf, especially when careers are on the line. Likewise, sometimes people, they want to be the one that shows everybody that they know the thing. The brutal irony of intelligence is that it's often there on someone's desk, buried in a footnote or briefed but downplayed. These aren't just mistakes, they're system-level dysfunction, and they almost always cost lives, credibility, and the trust of the public. So with that context, let's talk about 3 of the biggest intelligence failures in the modern intelligence world. What led to them? What went wrong? And what we still have yet to learn? This first one's about the Soviet Union back in 1941. In the months before June 1941, Soviet intelligence was screaming red flags from Britain, from American sources, and especially from Soviet spy Richard Sorge in Tokyo. The message was the same. Hitler is coming. German troop movements, logistical buildups, and intercepted communications made it clear that Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the USSR, was imminent. But Stalin dismissed it all. He was convinced Hitler wouldn't risk a 2-front war. Worse, he thought British intelligence was trying to bait the USSR into war with Germany. So when 3 million German troops and over 3,000 tanks crossed into Soviet territory on June 22, 1941, the Red Army was unprepared. Airfields were bombed while planes were still on the ground. Commanders had no orders. Border defenses were obliterated. This wasn't just a failure of intel, it was a failure of belief. Stalin thought he knew better than his intelligence apparatus. His distrust of the West combined with his ego created a situation where truth had to fight through ideology and lost. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured in the first month. Cities fell, infrastructure was destroyed. The USSR only survived by sheer manpower, brutal scorched earth tactics, and time bought by winter. It's always that dang Russian winter. But what's the future fix? Maybe don't build an intelligence system where analysts fear being executed for saying something the boss doesn't like. Often subordinate individuals will have fear of repercussions or adverse action should they go against how their higher element feels. This is antithetical to what it means to be a member of the intelligence community. We need to allow the data to speak and to give the data to our decision makers so they can make timely and informed choices on how to employ their given assets. The next one is probably one of the biggest failures in intelligence history, and it has to do with 9/11 in the United States. In the months leading up to September 11, 2001, U.S. intelligence agencies had mounting evidence that al-Qaeda was planning something. The CIA was tracking individuals with terror ties entering the U.S., the FBI was warned about potential hijack training, and then came the infamous presidential daily briefing from August 6th titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S. The warning outlined possible targets and mentioned hijackings, but the memo was vague, the intelligence community was fragmented, and interagency communication was abysmal. The CIA didn't tell the FBI what it knew, the FBI didn't follow up on flight school reports, the FAA didn't get a clear threat picture. This was less about what was known and more about who wasn't talking to who. The post-Cold War intelligence structure had become bloated, siloed, and deeply risk-averse. No one wanted to sound the alarm without actionable intelligence, which in bureaucrat speak means we're going to wait until it's too late. It is very common for people in the military to be risk-averse when it comes to this kind of stuff. Nobody wants to be wrong. The result was 2,977 deaths, the collapse of the Twin Towers, a plane into the Pentagon, and the reshaping of U.S. foreign and domestic policy for decades to come. We got the Patriot Act, the TSA, the War on Terror, 2 full-blown invasions, and trillions in military spending, all because we couldn't connect the dots. How do we fix this one? The U.S. did create the Department of Homeland Security and tried to improve interagency communication, but bureaucracy is stubborn. The deeper fix: break down silos, reward risk takers, and stop waiting for 100% certainty in a world that rarely gives it. Sometimes information silos occur for nefarious reasons. At times, an individual's ego can influence them to withhold information so that they can be the one to get the credit. This isn't always the case, but it's happened throughout history to devastating effect. If you enjoy my channel and would like to support me further, head over to themandatoryfunday.com. We've got all the merchandise you see in my videos over there. Members of the website get 20% off. There's also a link to order regulation compliant shirts that you can wear under your uniform. Let's get back to the video. The final intel failure we're going to talk about is the Yom Kippur surprise, and it has to do with Israel in 1973. By 1973, Israeli intelligence was flying high on the success of the Six-Day War. They had eyes and ears on the Arab neighbors and a belief known as the conceptia that Egypt and Syria wouldn't dare attack until they had long-range bombers and full air superiority. Air superiority is absolutely crucial to mission success in the modern world. So when Egypt began amassing troops along the Suez Canal and Syria moved tanks near the Golan Heights, Israeli leadership wrote it off as exercises. Warnings from Mossad and allied sources were ignored or minimized. Then came October 6th, Yom Kippur. Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated attack. Israeli defenses were overrun. It took days of brutal fighting and massive U.S. resupply efforts before Israel regained the upper hand. This wasn't a lack of information, it was the assumption that they wouldn't dare. It created a blind spot so wide you could drive a tank through it, and that is literally what they did. The failure led to over 2,600 Israeli deaths and the loss of initial battlefield control. The psychological damage was huge as well. Public confidence in the government and intelligence community collapsed. Heads rolled, commissions were formed. And for the first time, Israel started thinking about peace not from a position of invincibility, but from one of vulnerability. But what are future fixes for this? Since then, Israel has embraced more flexibility, emphasized human intelligence alongside tech, and institutionalized more dissent in its intel analysis. But the lesson is clear: if you start believing your enemies wouldn't dare, get ready to be proven wrong. The gaps we believe someone wouldn't dare in is exactly when they would and when we won't see it coming. The greatest commanders in history have taken advantage of these gaps or seams, employing tactics that had never been seen before or acting in a way that defies historical data and even logic. The effects can be catastrophic for those they are arrayed against. I have been an intel guy for quite some time, and let me tell you, it is very personality driven, from the leadership to the subordinates. Everyone has to work as a team and clearly communicate, and even under the best case scenario, it is still exceptionally difficult. You're talking about a bunch of people trying to take massive amounts of information and then figure out what other people are doing. There are systems and processes in place, to be sure, and a lot of those systems and processes are phenomenal. At the end of the day, there's only so much an element humans can do on the physical battle space. But skilled commanders are born every day, and they will understand inherently how to make use of the seams and gaps that are inherent in all people and the way that we think. Recognizing your own biases and your own fallacies in your logic is absolutely critical, and it takes a level of maturity that some people simply don't possess. And I'm speaking to myself. I've been an intel guy for a while. I'm speaking to myself first before I speak to anybody else. Everyone has inherent flaws in the way they think and do things. Everyone has biases and logical fallacies that they employ. So what do Stalin, the CIA, and Israeli generals all have in common? They had the intel, they ignored the intel, and they paid for it. The reality is this: intelligence doesn't fail because the bad guys are better. It fails because good guys stop listening, stop challenging their assumptions, and start thinking they've got it all figured out. And history has receipts. If you liked this video, make sure to check one of the other ones out on the screen. I really appreciate you guys watching. I have a ton of geopolitics content that comes out every single week. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end, and I hope to see you next time.